I'm going to introduce three speakers now at this time, although they're going to go back to back to back, and then we'll hold questions until the end. And we hope everybody stays on for what has really consistently been a nice question and answer and discussion period for most of these. So thanks again to, it looks like another great turnout, everybody coming on a Friday. So the first speaker who will kick us off is Jason Smith. Jason got his bachelor's and his master's from Michigan State University and has been with Sioux Tribe now for 3 years. Following Jason will be Rusty Aikens. Rusty got his bachelor's at Lake Superior State University. Has also been with Sioux Tribe for quite a long time, but has been he converted from wildlife to fisheries about 5 years ago. And lastly, we have Kris Day from the Little Traverse Bay Band of Odawa Indians. Kris has been with Little Traverse Bay Band for 9 years and has been hatchery manager for the last 6 years. And we were just chatting before, they've been doing egg takes, or he's been doing egg takes for each of those 9 years. But because of all the different species and all the different stocks that they've been involved with, he actually has about 19 events of egg takes in those 9 years. So we look forward to their presentation now. Jason, please take it away.
How about now? Unmuted?
You're unmuted. Yep. And we see your first slide. Looks good.
Good. So it's really fun to be here today, and it's especially fun to be here because my part of this presentation is really the thing that I care about the most. So the thread that I'm going to hope wraps through this entire thing is that relationships are the deal. Without those relationships, none of this is worth doing it. And I personally wouldn't be here without these relationships. So it's really fun to get to do this part and then let Kris and Rusty come and talk to you about data and things that are actually happening. But I think it's helpful to think back through this thread of relationships. And the relationship between these beautiful little silvery fishes and the Anishinaabe people is ancient and ongoing. And that's really important. Every day when I think about coming to work, that's what I think about, is the fact that this relationship is ancient, critical, and ongoing. So Atika Meg, the whitefish, Atona P, the Cisco, the herring, and Jitchkus, all of the chubs, you know. And so all the time I'm thinking about these relationships, and I didn't have elegant words for them. So I thought about folks who were living here at Bowetting, here in the Sioux, catching fish, catching Atika Meg in the rapids, using hoop nets. And like Kris and I were talking today about, like, if the guy in the front of the boat took his shirt off, you'd see arms like we don't see these days. That hoop net in the St. Mary's Rapids is not an easy thing to hold still, you know. And I think we have to constantly look like at history, at present and future, history, present and future, kind of the 7 generations teachings, which go backwards and forwards. And so I'm constantly trying to keep these things in my mind as we do our day-to-day work. So some folks would argue that even the fishery today is fairly ancient, given that this is Sean's boat. And, you know, we go out in Lake Superior in this 1920s circa gillnet tug. So while lots has changed, lots has stayed the same. One thing that I always like to touch on is when I thought about tribes and treaty rights and fishing in the ceded territories, I had all these jumbled ideas in my head, and I had no elegant words for them at all. And I got lucky to stumble into Frank Edowagishik. And Frank told me, "What, you think treaty rights is about selling boxes full of fish?" And in my naive way, I kind of said, yeah, I think that's, and I was at least smart enough to say, yeah, that's part of it. Frank told me treaty rights are about singing for the fish, dancing with the fish, dancing for the fish, ceremony and celebration with and for the fish. for me, if I forget what treaty rights really mean, there's not enough reason to do this work, because the work can be challenging and frustrating and wonderful and exciting. But for me, that's the part I have to keep in my brain in order to go do this work every day. And this is the cat that got me into this whole Coregonid mess. You know, Donner hired me after I went 0 for 49 on my first 49 job applications. And Donner's like, you're going to be the Coregonid guy. And I'm thinking, I don't know what a Coregonid is, you know. And, you know, it was a few months ago that Amanda finally got us straight on what terms we should be using for these beautiful silvery fishes. So Donner got me into this whole Coregonid wonderful mess. And that was the first one that I ever caught. That was the first Cisco I ever caught working for Little Traverse. And I remember it as clearly today. And so that really is where my love affair started, was with that fish right there. So we were talking today about the effects of COVID, not the big effects, not people dead, not all of that terrible stuff, but this idea that COVID has made things super challenging in some ways. And I was thinking, yep. I was in a meeting with Matt Herbert, and Matt Herbert was telling me about Great Lakes fish that spawned in tributaries. And I thought to myself, well, that's really interesting, but I'm not sure I'm going to do anything about it. But it was really interesting. And about a meeting later, Bo says, hey, you know, multiple life histories is really important for these fish to sustain during different times. If you have multiple life histories, if it's a bad year in the lake, you got river fish. If it's a bad year in the river, you got lake fish. So really 2 tiny conversations that I know didn't mean that much to Bo or Matt changed the trajectory of my life. You know, so this is the stuff I want to work on. And it comes from those interactions that we don't always spend enough time thinking about. So thank you both to Matt and Bo for, you know, cluttering up the rest of my life with these beautiful little silvery fishes. So we think about river spawning whitefish a little bit right now, right? Green Bay is doing really well in the whitefish department, and they have river spawning whitefish. So Matt Herbert and I decided we'd go out and try to find river spawning whitefish in places outside of the Wisconsin waters of Green Bay. We had lots of good partners, Scoob and Gust, and lots of folks have been out with us. Leo's been out with us. We go to the Escanaba River, we turn on the electricity, we don't catch any fish for a few minutes, and then the first 10 fish we find are whitefish. I'm thinking, yeah, this is a piece of cake. River run whitefish is simple. You just go there and you hit the electricity. And then in the ensuing 5 years, we only ever found fish in the Escanaba. We looked everywhere we could think to look, but no whitefish anywhere but the Escanaba. More sparkle carp than I ever dreamed of seeing. Tens of thousands of sparkle carp in every tributaries, from those as big as a ditch to the biggest tributaries filled with sparkle carp. And maybe a story for a whole nother time, but this was our excitement from this year. We had a report from law enforcement that there might be spawning whitefish in the Muskong River, and we had a really good location. So Leo and my dad, Matt Herbert, and my captain Ron went to the Muskong. We shocked upstream a long ways. We caught a handful of pike, a whole bunch of sparkle carp, not much else. And we got back downstream a little ways from the launch to the exact spot that law enforcement had said there might be whitefish. And I caught these 2 whitefish right away. I just scooped them up quick. They were right next to each other, scooped them up, put them in the horse trough, went on to find some more fish. We didn't find any more fish. And I thought, well, I'm going to just measure these up and work them up real quick. And as soon as I put this fish on the board, I thought, uh-oh, that's not a Tikameg, that's a Tonopee. So we found this pair of spawning Cisco in the Muskong River, spawning right on known walleye spawning grounds from the spring, similar to what the folks in Green Bay find with whitefish spawning on known walleye spawning grounds. So I'm pretty convinced that this pair of fish was spawning in the Muskong River this year's November 25th or 6th, something like that. I think it was the day before Thanksgiving, maybe. So that's kind of the part of the project that I have been really thinking about but it sets up all of these possible restorations that I think Kris and Rusty will talk to you about. Restoring river spawning Atikamekw runs, restoring kai in places where that deep water flock has been missing for a long time. And it's really exciting work that fulfills me in many, many ways. And with that, I'll hand it off to Rusty, and he can walk away from the sink and come on over here and give you the whitefish story.
Thanks. My name's Rusty Aikens, as he said, with Sioux Tribe. I can do that. So to give you a little background on Sioux Tribe's hatchery program, we maintain 2 hatchery facilities. The one on the left there is our walleye rearing pond complex near Barbow, Michigan. And then the one on the right is our Nuns Creek facility down at near Hessel, Michigan, located right on Nuns Creek. The walleye ponds have always been used as walleye ponds. So that's where a lot of our background at Sioux Tribe is doing walleyes. We've been doing them for 30 years in ponds. Nuns was always used for a variety of different things, from research to, for incubating walleye eggs when we did 2 strains at a time, different lamprey experiments over the years. But when I came on board in 2017, the leadership kind of asked me what could be done about stocking whitefish. And so I started looking into it. There really didn't seem to be a lot of it going on in North America, even less in the Great Lakes area. And so it was really felt like we need to start trying to figure that out for ourselves and how that could be done. So our early objectives were very broad. We really just considered the first 3 years, pilot years. We wanted to figure out if we could do it. Well, first, I kind of knew it could be done from research, but could Sioux Tribe do it? What are the challenges that make it up that it's going to be a problem, and then explore some different methods. What we're really looking to do in those first few years and continue is to kind of set a framework of how this could be done. If other agencies were interested in doing it, maybe we could get some of this learning curve out of the way. That. And so when we looked at survival, the short answer is yes, it can be done. We've raised fish into the spring in the raceways at Nuns. We've raised summer and fall fingerlings in ponds. And then we've also raised fish to a year old in tanks. And their survival, we've kind of found survival wise, once you get them to 25 millimeters, about the 1 inch mark, they're pretty hardy at that time. Excuse me. It's getting them there. Once you get them there, most of the mortality we see after that point is usually what I like to call self-inflicted wounds, which range from anywhere from blown breakers, people turning the drain valve the wrong way, knocking screens off, overflowing tanks. Like, all these things have led to mortality events in our experience. And as most people know, once those fish are dead, you can't bring them back. And so you get 1 shot each year to do this. And so, it's taken us 3 years just to get some of these things figured out. But again, once you get them up to about 1 inch, we think they do pretty well. The biggest challenge we have, and it's ongoing, is gamete collection. And weather is the driving force behind that. So like I said, we started in 2018. We were doing some fall assessment work for lake trout over by Drummond Island, stumbled upon some whitefish, not stumbled upon them, we knew they were there. Caught them all, filled our hatchery in about 3-4 days, and thought, well, this is pretty easy. And then the following year, 2019, we went back to the same locations. The wind kept us from getting out of the cove for 4 days that we had booked the cabin over there in the dock. And then after that, the temperature dropped to below 0 Fahrenheit, and the boat launch is iced up and marinas iced up. We couldn't get our boats in anymore. And so just like that quickly, our egg take season was over. Luckily, little Travis was able to help us out that year and provided us with some fry, and we were able to keep going with some of our experiments. Fast forward to 2020, that's we contacted a trap net fisherman that fishes a commercial fisher Sioux tribe member, and he allowed us to go out with him on his last day of lifting before the closure and run through his fish that he pulled up. And then so we were able to, we had 14 fish that were ripe when we came up, and that's what we did. We spawned them right there on the boat. You can see those techs are actually spawning fish right there on the boat. He allowed us to keep another 25 females. We brought them back to the hatchery and held them there in holding tanks, and they ripened up over the next few days, and we were able to spawn out another 25 of them. So this year, so 2019, it was too cold, and this year it was too warm. We went out with the same commercial fisherman. This year we went ahead and just contracted him for 3 days worth of work. And he wanted to, because of the weather, he wanted to get out a few days before the closure. And so we got the last of them on November 4th from him. And these fish, the water temperature outside Detour was about 13 degrees Celsius at the time we were fishing. So these fish were nowhere near spawning condition. They were, for people who are familiar with the verbiage, they were tight, they were green, nowhere near them. So we brought them back and we held them in our tanks here. What you're looking at, it's just an old oil tank. It's cut in half. There's 2 of them. There's one to the right there too. Put males on one side, females on the other. It's about it holds about 10,000 gallons of water, so it's fairly big. And we were able to hold fish and spawn them. We ended up spawning. We brought back about 100. We spawned a little over 40 of them. Some of them, because it was so early, like the fish we caught were not spawning what we consider, staging fish. So we caught a variety of fish with him, and so not all of them were even going to spawn that year. So we ended up spawning 40 fish out of that. The last fish we spawned on it was 35 days after we got it. So we were able to hold them for quite a long time. And so we were impressed with that. And we really had very little mortality. We had less than 10%, which is something we felt comfortable with. And some of that was the mink on the property leading to that. So, maybe those are things we can build fences around or something like that, or maybe it just doesn't happen next year. Who knows? But we every time we think we have egg take figured out, weather just reminds us that, we're not in control. One of the other challenges we identified is the feed training. Like I said, once we get these fish up to about an inch, they are pretty hardy. And we've gone through a few different working theories over the years, with velocity in the tanks, where we give them the right feed, are we providing the right lights? And we've played around with some of those variables there. And based on some conversations I've had with people, my new working theory is maybe the incubation period is too short. We're incubating them in too warm of water. As you would think, like these eggs get laid in November, the lakes are, 4 down to 4 degrees, and then even lower after that, they get ice covered, while these eggs in our hatcheries are being incubated at 46 or 8 degrees Celsius, coming out of well water. And so we see these fish hatch out after about 55 to 60 days, which is a lot more accelerated than what you'd see in the wild. These things would last until late March, April, maybe even longer at that point. And so we're thinking, like I said, our working theory now is maybe these things are coming out underdeveloped, and it's not necessarily feed training. These things were destined not to make it from the jump start. And so we're doing some colder incubations this year, and we're hoping that's going to, give us some insight on whether that theory has any merit or not. And so the methods we use were, tanks, like I said, raceways, and then ponds. And again, in the tanks, we did a few different ways. We did flow through and we did recirculation. The flow through, again, well water, 8 degrees Celsius. They definitely take less maintenance to take care of those tanks, but the growth is really a lot slower than what you'd see, what we see in the recirculation. In the recirc tanks, we kept them right about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and the difference in growth was phenomenal. And so, but then of course, also the maintenance on those was a lot more. And then of course, when COVID kicked in, and in order to reduce staff and not reduce staff, but staff time in the hatchery and those types of things, we kind of put the recirc on hold for a couple of years, and hopefully be taking it back up this year. So the raceways we use are located there on your bottom left of your screen. That's again at the Nuns Creek facility. Those raceways are about 6 feet wide, about 60 feet long. They are gravity fed through by Nuns Creek through the creek there. So we have no pumping facility there. It's just as it flows through, and Nuns tends to be both seasonal and flashy. and this year we had very little, less than average snowpack going into the spring, and then we had a very dry June, and so that the flow through those raceways really slowed down in June a lot faster than we anticipated. And so we did have an event, a mortality event there, which we kind of assume, well, we're pretty certain it was due to oxygen deprivation to the fish. There was, with the low flow and the heating up of the water, the oxygen nosedived, and those fish couldn't handle it. And so we think raceways works, at least ours will work. This is a stock photo from Google Earth. And so when we did it, we have a canopy over one of the raceways, and the fish tend to like to be under that a lot more. They responded well to the feeders, both belt feeders and vibration feeders and dispersed feeders. So they seem to take to being fed in the raceways fine. Again, it's just a matter of keeping an eye on it. If we're going to use, the Sioux tribe is going to use those raceways, we have to be cognizant of the water flow and oxygen levels in them. The thing we're most excited about here at Sioux tribe is the success we've had in the pond rearing up these whitefish. So in 2019, we have a 2.5 acre pond. It's a reclaimed sewage pond from a housing complex the tribe owns, and they moved the housing complex on the city water, and they turned the pond over us, and so we turned it into a rearing pond. So in May of 2020, we wanted to give that a try to see how that worked. Like I said, a lot of our background is in walleye pond rearing, so that's something we wanted to see if it worked with whitefish. And so we put just under 31,000 fish in there on May 10th. They were about 26 millimeters, so just over an inch. They weighed about 0.26 grams a piece. And we pulled them out on July 9th, and they were 105 millimeters and about 8.8 grams a piece. So this one you're looking at there, you can see it's about the average size of the fish we came out. We ended up having about a 20% survival of those fish. So it was about 5,800, I think was the number, something like that. And we were pretty happy with that. Of course it was year one. So we thought, maybe some tweaks and changes, we get that survival rate up, and maybe we're onto something here. And then the following year, we did it again. We put 28,000 in there that time. They were approximately the same size, 23 millimeters. We put them in 0.18 grams. And then we let those ones go until mid-October. And when we pulled those out, we had an average of 162 millimeters, so about 6.5 inches. And they were just over 30 grams a piece at 30.3 on October 17th. For those ones, we had about a 27 or 28% survival rate. And so that was pretty impressive, that approaching 30% survival all the way till fall, being able to produce these big and beautiful. Well, we are really happy with, the condition of those fish when they came out. And I don't think the ruler gave that one as much context as it needed. So here's another picture of what they look like. And, one of the reasons a couple of reasons we're really excited about this pond stuff. We were able to get over 500 pounds, so 520 pounds out of a 2.5 acre pond, which comes out to just over 200 pounds per acre. Coming from the walleye world where they consider 65 to 100 pounds per acre, 100, 120 pounds an acre is on the top of what a pond can produce. To be able to produce 200 pounds an acre is pretty exciting. I would like to think we're not at the optimal level yet, and so excited that it might get better over the next few years. The other thing is we didn't feed these. Well, we fed them in the hatchery until they got to the 23 millimeters, but in the ponds we just fertilize the ponds, so they just produces its own plankton community. And then so our feed cost in these fish from the time they went into the pond after they got out of the hatchery was less than $1,000. And so that brings it down under $2 a pound for these fish, these fall fish. Less than 12 cents a fish is what we figured it out on feed cost alone. Haven't quite done the calculations for staff time and all that, but those are going to be similar between tanks and ponds anyway, that staff time, because most of our staff time is used for egg take. And really the ponds is actually a lot easier to maintain than, especially the recirculation tanks. We only need to fertilize it for, once a week for the first 6 weeks. So after that, we didn't do anything except for to check to see if we could still find them once or twice through the summer after the 1st of July. So very low maintenance on these things, a lot lower staff cost. And so, like I said, we're pretty excited about that. So where we're at currently in our future work is right now we've got eggs on a cooler incubation. So we're right around 38, 40 degrees Fahrenheit on these things. So a little cooler. We're hoping to extend that incubation period out. It would be really nice in a perfect world if these things start hatching out about the time the ice comes off the pond, and we could go straight from sack fry right into the pond, kind of follow that walleye model. And I think that's eventually our goal, is to try to find that, because the less they have to go through feed training, like you feed train them in the tank and then they got to defend on their own in the pond. And so if we take that part out in the middle, we think we can up the survival rate at that point. And then we've got, Jason talked about the river spawning rehabilitation work we're doing. And so we're doing some work in the hatchery there to kind of complement his work that he's doing there. What we did last year is, these are Scottie Jordan incubation systems. They're used a lot for our trout and salmon work. And so we tried these last year, and I don't know if you can see the little eggs in there, the two little dots, those are eyed eggs. We loaded in them. And then we also tried the picture on your left is we took these AstroTurf floor mat type of materials, which was used in the past for lake trout egg incubation out in the wild. And we want to give that a run too. And so what you're looking on your right side is just a holding tank. Those were screened in cages, and we put those right down in the raceway. And so those eggs were incubated in creek water, natural temperatures. The mats did not do well. We don't think they did well, I guess I should say. So I made a kind of a big mistake there. Is it didn't look good, and so it was a very qualitative decision, I guess. And then I pulled the Scottie Jordan out, and it, when I opened up the first plate too, it had what appeared to be some fungused up eggs, and a couple of them were moving and stuff like that. So I knew those were still viable. And so I made the decision on March 31st just to kind of put an end to that little experiment. And I was going to take that Scottie Jordan back to the office and inventory what was in there as far as, dead, did it die, did it fungus, did it never get fertilized, like was it still viable? And so I put them in a tub of water, drove the 40 minutes to the Sioux, and when I got back to the Sioux, so the water we pulled them out of, as you can see, it was ice. We chipped the ice out, and we got them back to the Sioux. They had been in a tub of water of 46-degree water for about 40-45 minutes, and when we opened it up, there was fish fry swimming everywhere. And so, to the best of our calculations, we ended up with about a 27% survival rate on that. Like I said, caught us a little off guard. So, that's our best estimate there. And then maybe I was too quick to judge the mats on the left-hand side, and should have been a little more careful and tried those too. But that's something we can work on going forward, and something we're going to. And so that effort right there led us to think we need to, this stuff is probable and possible. So we need to focus on a little bit more. So we did a complete hatchery remodel over this last summer and fall. And one of the things we put in it was these simulated streams that you see there. And those simulated streams will allow us to monitor these Scottie Jordans, and then the egg mat method in those troughs. And then we've got the third one there is our control trough. And so it's just filled with cobble that we sprinkle eggs over, and we'll keep an eye on those and see how they hatch out and do that. And so we're excited about that. We're hoping we can make some progress. Like I said, the first few years was kind of pilot work and seeing if it was possible. And now we're ready to get a little more scientific towards this, do some measuring, move away from the qualitative and a little more quantitative. And so hopefully, this new hatchery system allows us to do this. I just came from this morning. I was over at the grand opening of the Center for Freshwater Research over at Lake State. Me and Jason have been in contact with them. We've got some exciting things that we want to work on together. And so that's going to be exciting going forward. They're really interested in our pond culture too. And so hopefully with their work, we can put a little more science around this and really start coming up with some answers of, best practices moving forward. And so with that, that's about all I've got. I guess now I'll turn it over to Kris. He can take over and tell you about his work.
All right. Can you hear me? As long as
Yes.
Jason can advance the slides for me. So I'm going to talk about our project now. We're working it's in a work group with several other agencies and organizations, but I'm probably just going to cover what we've done so far and kind of where we're going with it. As you probably most all know, right? We had the collapse of the Coregonid, the offshore food webs. And so a lot of that now, people are starting to think maybe we can do something about it. Maybe we can try to restore offshore food webs. And, for us, it is about restoring the lower Great Lakes, but also we are going to gain a lot of knowledge just into Coregonids in general, more specificity to some of these species that we may not interact with very often. If you want, Jason, you can go to the next one. You can advance one if you want, Jason. Kind of the foundation of what we're looking at with this KI research. Are you still there, Jason? Got an idea, but we'll see. Oh, there we are. So anyways, Matt Herbert with the Nature Conservancy and Mark Vinson with USGS did a lot of background research on trying to just find the best time that we should be trying to collect eggs And they've kind of narrowed it down to late December and even into January. You're fine if you're one slide too far. That's fine. Yep, so there's a great picture of the lake in January. I think they were able to break ice to get out, but what we've come to find is that when the kai spawn, it's often very difficult to access the lake just in general, whether it's big waves or solid ice. Now you can go to the next one. So we're fishing out of Munising. If you're not familiar, we're on the South Shore of Lake Superior. We're going around Grand Island. Now there are two different areas that they have fished, but the data points on the little map here are just what we did January of this year. There are deeper sections of the lake on the northwest side of Grand Island pictured there. But really that's up to the fisherman that we've contracted. And if he thinks we can make it out there. It's often, it's pretty bumpy, even on the good days that we go out. And I think I'll get into that a little bit later, but you can go to the next one, Jason, if you want. Now to start this whole process of bringing fish into a hatchery or any restoration, if you're going to start bringing fish in, you need to have fish health data so that we know, number one, that we're not receiving fish that have something that'll transmit through all of our stocks, but also if we're putting anything out ever, you're not going to want to put out diseased fish into a population that is either recovering or building. So we started off with, we work with the Fish and Wildlife Service out of La Crosse, Wisconsin. And so they do our fish health samples. We sampled 60 fish prior to our egg take. The deal with that is as long as it's a part of the spawning population, they tend to go together. We're hoping to establish like a foundation. So if anybody were ever to want to get a brood stock started from somewhere, we at least have a starter going for a fish health background, because they typically want at least 3 years, if not longer, for, you know, when I work with the Fish and Wildlife Service. You can go to the next one. This is, again, the picture of the boat with Jason was standing by earlier. We were able this year to go out on January 4th and the 12th. In total, we got 29 pairs, and we'll get into what those pairs actually meant and like what we kind of found from that. But in overall, I have a little note here that says we had less than 2,500 eggs per female. I don't know if I can remember Jason or Rusty's stat on their number of eggs per fish, but kind of a scale. My Cisco from Elk Rapids averaged 28,000 eggs per female, and my Whitefish from Little Traverse Bay averaged 50,000 eggs per female. So one of the logistical things, if we're going to ever think of using these fish for any quantity of eggs, it may take a lot of females to accomplish that. If you want, you can go to the next one. And this is just a process. If you're curious on how everything went down, picture on the left is up in the bow, that you can kind of see the puller, the lifter up there. They have a deck along the left side where they pick them out. They put them in a little orange bucket. Then you can see the right picture. Jason just dumps them into a big tub, and that's where we sort through them. We try to keep everybody as lively as we can. And I put that in quotes because honestly, they're not going to survive coming up 700 feet off the bottom. But at least if they're gilling, that helps with fertility. Over the past 9 years or so, I think we've run into trying to spawn dead fish is not necessarily very productive. You can go to the next one. And so we set up a nice table. We had iodine and erythromycin ready. We had spawning bowls, and we were using the dry pan method. We had towels out to dry all the fish off. But when we're in those rollers, that whole table went to a 45 and everything just shot off of it and hit the floor. So what we come to find out is just leave the table at home and just do it on a cooler. Yep, that's fine. So in the process, we brought up a ton of fish, and all these deep water Coregonids, a lot of them do look similar. And so we started going through and just sorting by species. If we can find our kayais and identify those went in a bucket. Then we sorted those, male, female. And then we started going through the females and looking to see if they were ripe or running or green, and then kind of see condition. Go to the next one. A few takeaways just from that sorting process. We found a ton of males. And like I said, we had 2 egg takes. The first one wasn't necessarily as productive, as we only had 8, and most of those were hybrids. But what it really came down to is that we had a very short amount of females. Even in the first egg take, the bloaters were somewhat sparse, but male kai were present. They were ripe, and we easily could express them. In fact, we kind of just did not touch that bucket because we didn't want them to go off before we were ready. But plenty of milk. It was pretty easy to work with. You can go to the next one. And so then we get into the females, and this is where the tricky part comes in. When you're collecting eggs, you want those eggs to just fall out on their own, right? Most, in my experience, I feel like my Cisco, and to some extent my Whitefish, they'll give you eggs before they're truly ready. And, you'll have a reduced fertility rate because of that, and they'll progress through, but you want them to fall out freely. You want ovarian fluid. The picture on the left is a good example of almost all the females we found, certainly for kai, were very green. The eggs were still opaque. They were still skeined up. There was no ovarian fluid present. So that made things a little more difficult, because when you're sorting through, well, we have these that are definitively kai, yeah, but none of them are ready. We have some that could be kai, they're kind of ready. Then we have some that they're probably bloater, but they're ripe. So we went through this process. So if you see some of the IDs later, that's why there's some inconsistency to that, is that we had those that we wanted to spawn, and then we had those that, well, they could be, and we were kind of just going along trying to make the best of it. You can go to the next one. Now, egg quality, for anybody who's interested, I use a paper out of Portugal. They were doing ocean fish, but they had a nice chart on categorizing eggs, and I can send it to anybody who would like to read it. But basically, all the eggs were hydrated, and they were opaque, but they were not ready to go. So we were not at that final stage of maturation. If I had to guess, we were maybe a week or 2 ahead. So even on January 12th of this year, we were probably still early. Surprisingly, on January 12th, we caught ripe and running Cisco, who were just throwing eggs everywhere. I mean, it was quite spectacular. We did run across a lot of bloater. I have a feeling from what we saw, they must spawn pretty close to the same time, or at least a week or so apart. You can go to the next one. One thing to note on, if anybody's out there doing parasite research, the parasite load for those kai was higher than anything I've seen in Grand Traverse Bay, Little Traverse Bay on Lake Michigan. It's higher than the fish I've seen out of the Apostle Islands. And I think it's higher than anything the Sioux tribe's seen over in Lake Huron and the Lake Chenaux. Every single fish we ran across had some kind of parasitic infection, if not all 3. We had external parasites, nematodes, and they often clogged the vent, which was really frustrating, trying to spawn fish out. Eggs are just going, and all of a sudden you get it'll clump up. I mean, we had to pick them out of the egg jars. There were just so many of them. So potentially there could be some sort of negative effect, but it'd be hard for me to say to what degree, or if there is at all. So you can go to the next one. So we're looking at hurdles. Well, what did we discover the first year, this pilot run? Ripe female kai is our pinch point. So the ripeness, we're thinking timing. It might be just that we're a little early. But then again, we have issues with ice coverage. So fishing the 3rd or 4th week of January may not physically be possible. So I think that's kind of some of the stuff that we're running into when it comes to feasibility of collecting these fish on a larger scale. We did run into some interesting stuff that not all the nets had female kai. That being said, we also ran into a lot of bloater. And from what I understand, we were this past round fishing 2-inch mesh, I think. And so we were catching a few more bloater. But from my understanding is if we switch to 1.5 inch, 95% of them will be kai. I don't know if that'll change our selection, if we'll get more males or females. That's certainly something I see with whitefish and Cisco in Lake Michigan. Could be happening with our kai as well. Also, again, like I said, some of the nets were just basically devoid of females. That could be a spatial interaction there. We may not be fishing necessarily in the perfect spot, but it's tough to say when you're fishing 500 to 700 feet down. I don't know what it looks like down there. We just really have the fish finder to tell us kind of the general shape of the bottom. But if we can get some right females this year, I'd say the egg collection would be pretty easy to accomplish if we can just figure these two things out. If you want to go to the next one. So when we brought them back, we had a little bit of a hurdle to overcome in that we didn't know necessarily who was who, if who was a kai, who was a bloater. Now I had my list that we started with on the boat, but we ran DNA and did genetics to just verify everybody. Now we're working with USGS in Ann Arbor and USGS in Tunison, New York, Ann Arbor, Michigan. And so once these eggs eye up, we actually ship them out to those facilities. So each facility had a different thing that they were trying to do. You know, Ann Arbor was okay receiving a lot hybrids. They were kind of interested in the viability of any of these hybrids and if it's happening naturally. So we kind of divvied them up that way, but we needed to know first if they were in fact hybrids. So that's why you'll see we have little egg jars for each pairing. And then we got them all in a 150-gallon tank, and that tank is just cycling a chiller to keep them at 4 degrees centigrade. And then we kept data loggers with each of the eggs as they were shipped out. Now, these eggs, if you're ever going to do it, I would not necessarily recommend these. And the only reason our eggs were so tiny, they actually went through the holes in the top and the bottom of these little incubators. So if you're working with like lake trout or something big, or round whitefish, I think had pretty big eggs. Those would be great for those, and you can do a very, very small amount pretty easily. But we're going to shift to a different one. If you want to go to the next one, just to give an example, they're like for cichlids, and they're basically McDonald jars underwater. But it's the same thing. We can set them all up side by side, and then because it's in an aquarium, we can just see right through and gauge a good roll to them and see how they're developing. You want to go to the next one? Now in March, we got our profiles, and they're going to look a little skewed, and there's a couple things to that. We did have kai and bloater crosses. We had Cisco and bloater crosses, and we had bloater crosses. But these categories are only those that fertilized and only those that survived. You won't see kai crosses because basically all the females were too green, and that kind of biased. We used all of our boy kai on all the female kai. So when we were left over, well, then we just kind of mixed everybody together. I want to say we had to do IDs on 58 fish, and we got 14 of them wrong. So we were close, but not 100%. And that kind of goes into that probably a kai, probably not. So some of those, it just depends how we put them down. So if you want to go to the next one, we shipped them out. Tunison got the ones that were crossed kai hybrids. Everybody else who's like a Cisco bloater hybrid, those all went to Ann Arbor. We kept some here on site that were bloater hybrids, I believe as well. If you want to go to the next one. We should probably, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that so far I've seen a lot more deformities just in our kai bloater hybrids, and in this whole kai project, I've seen a lot more than I've seen really any other time. Like I want to say we do about 1 million to 1.5 million whitefish eggs every year. I may only see 2 or 3 two-headed fish. I was finding multiple two-headed fish in several of the jars. So So there's something there. I don't know if that's just something with the hybrid process or if it's something we're doing, but probably something to keep an eye on. If you want to go to the next one. So looking ahead, kind of the direction we're going, our fish health is actually going to happen in 2 weeks, I think, from today. It might even start next week. Depends on when the weather is going to be good, but after Christmas, we're looking to go out and start doing netting again and trying to spawn some more. The fish out of this batch, we're going to start doing optimal culture temperatures for kai. And those, we got a whole span of temperatures, and we're actually going to divide those out between the 3 facilities, ours and the 2 USGS facilities. We applied for a GLRI grant this year, and we've been selected by the steering committee, and we're still awaiting, I guess, congressional approval, but that should fund this project going forward, at least for the next year or so, where we can get a real replicated intensive study going. If you want to go to the next one, I think we're about done with that.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Kris. And to go back up just a little bit, thank you to the very nice setup and the importance of communication that Jason spoke about. Enjoyed Rusty's talk about the different methods for rearing whitefish and potentially some innovations there with respect to pond rearing, and then under flow conditions, simulating sort of what they would be experiencing in the rivers. And then Kris, of course, talking us on this cutting edge for the first time, trying to rear kai, there were some studies back in the from the 1960s, published a little bit later, where there was some kai reared in the laboratory, but it's been quite a long time since this has been tried again. So really interesting pilot year of data he just described. So thanks very much, guys, for those talks. We do have time for some questions, and the question time, we can do this through flipping your camera on, raising your hand. We'll note you that way. I think I can see that. Nick can help me. You can also post questions in the chat, and I will see if we have any questions. If not, I can probably ask one here. Let's see, Andrew has his hand raised. Andrew, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, great talks, guys. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm laying on my couch with a cold here, so I'm not going to turn my video on. Yeah, that was real interesting. I'm pretty sure Greg Wright and Cora have a bunch of ponds that they reared lake whitefish in too. Jason, I don't know if you guys know anything about that, but I seem to remember him doing a bunch of whitefish rearing work in ponds. But my question has to do with the feeding and the transition. Have you guys tried any live food to help move fish through that transition? Or is it just small pelleted stuff?
No, we haven't tried live food. That's one of the things we considered. But to this point, no, it's just been, pelleted food, mash at that stage. But yeah, just artificial food so far.
Okay.
We've used, obviously, I think Kevin Loftus made a comment. White Lake's done lake whitefish intensively indoors for a long time. But we've used, we started with the skredding, like it's a Gemaween product. It's pretty small, the 0.1. For the whitefish, they can handle almost the next size up when they hatch because they're pretty big. But I know, like for when we were doing like bloater or Cisco and some of the kai, we actually started with they have like a freeze dried Artemia.
Yeah.
That'll help with we have gape limitations, mouth opening limitations.
Okay.
But we don't generally find, at least at our facility, I want to say the highest feed training mortality we've seen is 20%. That's from hatch, which, we may have some deformities in there too, but.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, it's Kevin Loftus. I could just add a couple of comments. Yeah, Roger's right. We've had pretty good success with Lake Whitefish at White Lake Fish Culture Station. When we could get it, we would start them with Odahime or Odahime diet. We can't get it in Canada now. It comes in various sizes, but we had really good success with that. In more recent years, we've switched to Skretting's Gemma diet. I don't know what the sizes are, but our hatchery manager at that station would know that stuff inside out. Similarly with bloater, in the first few years when we were trying to learn how to grow bloater, we did have access to Odahime, and we got some decent survival rates during the first few weeks following hatch. Since we haven't been able to get ahead of or get a hold of Odahime, we're struggling to get decent survival. We're still doing okay, but not as good as we could. I think we did try live feed one year, but I don't think that effort was, I don't think it worked out as well as we would have liked.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Andrew, for the questions. While we wait for another question, I might just go back to Rusty and ask him about, he talked about how beautiful those pondry or whitefish were. And I know that we've seen in Ann Arbor, at least, some of the shapes of the Cisco that get that sort of pug-headedness look to them. And I just wondered if you saw differences in the raceway or the tanks or the ponds with respect to any of those whitefish. Did you see any differences in shape like we can see with Cisco or even bloater rearing in some of these other systems?
The quick answer is not yet. The ones that we took out of the pond are all in the freezer still, and our techs have a tendency to take the month of December off, and so we've got them. We're gonna go through them. That's one of the things that was that we were curious about, and so we'll put those on. We'll take pictures of every one of those. We got 105 or whatever. We picked out 100 of them randomly to look at, and so that'll be winter work for our techs is to examine every one of those and then go and examine the ones we took out of the tanks in mid-July or late June when we shut our tank system down for the year too. So the quick answer is we didn't notice it as prominently, like a quick observation as we were going through them, but we'll have a more definite answer, more quantitative answer next year.
And Rusty's downplaying that by a lot. Out of that pond, there was exactly one fish with the facial deformities that we've seen in Cisco and in whitefish in tanks. Other than that, we saw none. And I wish I had a picture, because I put my head in the bucket as they were dumping in every time, because I've been so curious about this thing. And in the 2 years, we just haven't seen any deformities in the pond fish. And even in a tailing pond at Little Traverse, where fish escaped the hatchery and lived on their own in a tailing pond, I cast netted those fish out 4 or 5 years ago, and those fish had no deformities either. So something happens when they live in the wild. I don't know if it's diet. I don't know if it's living in the wild. I don't know what the thing is, but something happens.
Yeah, thanks for that elaboration, Jason. And did you get a sense of what kind of zooplankton were in that pond based on the fertilization? And I guess you had no oxygen trouble either, right? So you're able to find that sweet spot with fertilization? Or?
Don't know where they're getting oxygen from, to be honest with you. I mean, that was kind of the reason we pulled the plug on it in 2020, is because we took some readings a few different times, and every time we stuck the hydrolab in the water, it came up at very low oxygen, like really, which should have been unsustainable oxygen. And so, we didn't want to put any more resources in, and that's why we drained the pond in July like we did. We were seeing temperatures consistently at 80 degrees Fahrenheit in both summers, actually, in the water. And then, so I'm not sure where those fish are surviving in that pond. I just know they're
Yeah. Okay. How deep is it?
11 or 12 feet, maybe at the deepest.
Yeah.
The other weird part is the DO part. In the first year of the pond, right before we took those fish out, I was able to find literally a 1-inch band of water that had DO. It was 0 above and 0 below that, but there was a tiny little band. This year, our pond had tons of filamentous algae, and it had amazing oxygen, top to bottom, shore to shore, day, night, middle of the day, first thing in the morning, last thing in the evening. So I don't, and survival was the same those 2 times, or very close to the same. So there's lots of questions there that we still need. We need some Lake State students and professors to come up and give us some monitoring help. But there's lots of cool stuff happening with that, and they just seem to find a way. At this young age, I think they're plastic enough to make a living in places that we don't think they ought to make a living.
Okay. People being shy today with questions?
Well, I do have, this is Yuchun Kao from Ann Arbor. I do have a question here. So I want to ask, why you try to catch spawning kai in January. I think if I remember correctly, because when we look at historical data, when Kyle and Deason did their study, they found the spawning kai in Lake Michigan between October and early December, and I even have a map for the spawning habitat. So I want to ask the decision.
Yes, we have gone through all the historical stuff as well. And that was partly because I had a slide on there that was trying to basically lay out that in 2017, they tried to repeat those observations. In 2017, they went out, USGS and the Nature Conservancy went out, and they were trying to just say, oh, they're ripe and running at these times. And when they went out in 2017, all the way through 2020, we were unable to find any ripe and running fish during those times. In fact, we didn't start to find spent fish until basically into January. But that's where that came from. And I am aware, I think, wasn't there, even in the 50s, somebody noted they found spawning kai in like June or something like that. Like there are, and yes, I am aware of like past observations elsewhere, but that's where our dates came from, was that work that the USGS and Nature Conservancy did.
Well said, Chris. I don't know if Mark or Matt are on and wanted to add anything more, but I think Chris pretty well covered it there. There are several years of data trying to narrow this window in Lake Superior, which appears different than what historically was described in Lake Michigan. Other surprises too about sort of finding, Chris has seen plenty of spawning Cisco in Lake Michigan, and I think when they saw those ripe running Cisco in January, that was kind of surprising too.
They were beautiful. Yeah, they were.
And 500 feet down.
Yeah, 500 to 700 feet. Yeah, on the bottom, within the 6 feet of the bottom.
Yeah, which matches some of the things that others, Lake Superior people like Chuck Bronny have been saying. They're spawning deep, shallow, early, late. Although I don't know about that late, but yeah. Really cool findings.
I'm assuming it must be a very wide and squatty bell curve of when they like to spawn.
Start calling on people based on we've got a lot of participants here, being more quiet than normal. Ralph,
Hey,
great.
this is Ian. Have you guys tried fishing any canned nets or floating nets out by Grand Island?
We have not. We have had a discussion about possible different methods as to acquire these fish, whether honestly, we started talking about like oblique nets. We started talking about seeing if we could figure out a trawl in some way. We have kicked around the idea. I think right now we're kind of at our infancy to just the logistical hurdles to get a boat out there in January or even whatever time you could. You know, one of our main practices that we do in Little Traverse Bay in Lake Michigan and in Grand Traverse Bay is we normally collect our fish the weeks leading up to the spawn. I have them back in a holding pen. They ripen up, and when they're ready, we just go through and we spawn everybody, and whoever we don't use goes back into the lake. You know, these fish, you know, we're going, I think they said it was like 15 or 20 miles to one of the net sites. And if we go to the far side of Grand Island, I was told it's a lot farther. But you know, when we're 10 miles offshore, I don't know that there's, and pulling them up from 705 to 700 feet down, you know, nobody's going to survive that. So I'm not certain, you know, we talked about it that, you know, these fish are spawning not only in 3 dimensions, and we're only really sampling in 2, but also time of year and time of day, they change, you know, their position in the water column, and maybe even, you know, near shore, offshore. We don't really know that specificity timing wise. So, you know, we're kind of still feeling it out. You know, last year was our first run at it. So hopefully the future we can try out some new stuff and maybe test some things out.
So Ian, we do use canned, you know, jug nets on a regular basis here at Sioux Tribe and all of our stuff. But I have not yet had the nerve to ask Sean if he's willing to jug some nets 200 feet down in 700 feet of water, 16 miles offshore in January. I'm pretty sure that being punched in the face would be the answer that Sean would give me when I ask him that. So I haven't had the nerve, but I am curious about it for sure.
I'm willing for you to take that risk, Jason.
I knew you would, my brother.
Okay, let's see. I saw Ralph Tingley with his hand, and then we'll go back to Andrew after Ralph. Ralph.
Yeah, this is a question for Jason and Rusty. So given kind of some recent successes as you guys have moved forward, what do you see as the plans for riverine rehabilitation in the next few years coming from your end? And if I missed this, I apologize, but it's definitely got me intrigued.
I'll start it, and you know, Rusty can fill in if I miss or if he has good extra stuff. So we, you know, we are still in this stage of trying to identify rivers that we think are good candidates and don't have current spawning runs. And you know, so where do we go from there? We have this stuff that Rusty has talked about, you know, finding out ways to incubate in tributaries or in simulated tributaries. But then we're really trying to identify a candidate that we could do a small experiment on. We've had some talks about things like the Bear River, since it has that dam there and it would just be a one-way flow. And we might not really be up against any other angler groups who would have challenges. So we've thought about doing an experiment in some place like the Bear. We've thought about doing an experimental in-stream incubation in something like Nuns Creek, or even in some of these other little tributaries here in Lake Huron. And then, like, you know, we often think of the place like Matt Herbert and I, when we're dreaming big, we dream about the Muskegon and the Grand River, you know, an experiment in those two places that have enormous amounts of spawning habitat and enormous nursery habitats, especially in the form of drowned river mouths.
They're also historical places as well.
Okay. Thanks, Ralph. Andrew Muir and then Jory.
Well, I'll hold my question because it related back to the kayak stuff. So if Jory has something on river run fish, you can come back to me later.
Thanks. Actually, mine was on kayak as well. So if you want to jump back in front, you're welcome to.
Okay. Thanks, Jory. Yeah, the river spawning stuff is cool. Just a question, how much twine are you guys running when you're trying to collect those kayak? Like how long are your nets?
Jason might remember. If Matt's on here, he could probably verify, but it's a lot, I thought. You got a number, Jason? You're on mute, by the way.
My memory is that each gang had either 2,500 or 3,000 feet. So they were not, enormous, but they were sizable.
Okay.
Bigger than my
Yeah.
normal ones of 400 feet.
Yeah. You guys ran quite a few nets out there, did you?
For the kayak, I think they're just paired up, aren't they?
Two gangs.
Two gangs.
Okay.
Each of them about 2,500-ish feet.
And we did that
Okay.
for 2 days.
Yeah, 2-day sets, you said?
No, we went out twice.
Oh, okay. I just curious if you thought about like ramping up the effort. I know in Lake Huron when we used to when the bloater fishery was sort of winding down there, the commercial guys were fishing like 10-20,000 yards, and they'd set it for days. And you'd lift it and you'd get nothing for like miles, and then you'd get fish. So I mean, I just wonder if you're not on a major spawning distribution, I wonder if that's a sort of search and destroy mission you guys could do. I know it's a lot of gear, but just wondering if you thought about some of that kind of ways to sample a little harder.
I think we'd have to check with Matt if he can chime in on this, but he should have the catch numbers. I mean, we caught a significant amount of fish in many of the nets. I think just really, if 1% of your fish are ripe, I have to catch a lot, like 600 fish to get 100 or something like that, right? Or whatever it is. I have to catch a lot of fish. I think if we had hit it when they were going, we could have gotten 40 fish really easily. Or I think our goal was 30. And yeah, Matt is.
So for that pilot study with Ashland, with the Ashland USGS office, we had 3 2,000-foot gangs, but that had 4 different mesh, 500 feet of each of 1.5 2 inch, 2.5, and 3 inch mesh. Last year we just dropped all for the spawning work. We just dropped all the mesh sizes except for 1.5. So we really only had 1,500 feet of 1.5 out there. But Kris is right. I mean, we've got good catch rates with that amount. However, focusing on spawning this year, we purchased another 1,000 feet of actually more than that, 1,500 feet, I think, of more of 1.5. So we'll have more net out, more than twice as much net out than what was out last year for the spawning effort. But we should get, based on the pilot effort, we should still get a good kayak catch in that 1.5 net.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
So just to acknowledge quickly, Owen chimed in about kayak spawning time. Everybody check that chat. It's a helpful comment there. Jory.
Yeah. I am just curious if anywhere in the plans, I don't advocate for this, but it would be interesting to try it again, since you're trying everything, developing a captive brood stock of some sort. whether that be via an egg collection or even trying to keep these fish recovered from deep water. Yeah, I've had some success with lake trout in, 300 feet of water in Elk Lake if you do a bunch of things to compensate. Have you played around with the idea of trying captive adults?
Not of the fish that we've pulled off the bottom of the lake. For the most part, their swim bladders are coming out their vent.
Yeah.
And I mean, maybe they could, but
And these are
for
pretty
as fragile,
sensitive. Yeah.
for as fragile as our Cisco are, I'm assuming they wouldn't make it. I'm assuming they're a lot closer to Cisco than they are Whitefish.
And how about via an egg take? If you get a successful egg take, would it be your goal then to build a captive broodstock or to keep trying to perfect the wild egg collections, which quite frankly would be my preference, but
yeah, it's difficult to really know what the next step would be. I mean, we have in our work group, I think there's 4 different agencies maybe, and 5, maybe 6 different locations that we're all at. And everybody's got, Tunison has a very production focus, I think, for a lot of things. And they're really good about experimenting with that and how they would go about on a larger scale. And I know Ann Arbor has a somewhat smaller lab than I think maybe what Tunison has, but, they were really interested in some different stuff. A lot of these questions, I guess when we get there, we'll cross that bridge. But I think right now we're trying to stay focused. The first hurdle is to get them to successfully spawn and then bring them back. And the next hurdle would have to be that early life stage. And we'll just keep working our way down, seeing how far we can go. I don't think we're going to completely euthanize everybody at the end of the project. We're just going to have to meet again and see what we think we can do with however many fish we have left.
awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, just from the Ann Arbor perspective, and I don't know if Amanda wants to chime in, but I think, Joy, we would have the goal of what we would call like a research stock potentially. So keeping Kai in the lab for research to really test this hybrid viability question. So if the Lake Committee, for example, were to become interested in wanting to reintroduce Kai, but for example, might have a concern about back crossing with another deepwater Cisco or even Cisco, that's something that we could assess the potential viability for that in the laboratory first as a potential threat. But as Kris said, it's baby steps at this point. First, just trying to get survival of just pure Kai crosses, making sure we get those female Kai at the right time. Okay, let's see, another comment from Matt. Again, just commenting about the timing of Owen's comment about potentially their Kai are spawning later now with climate change. We are going 1 hour, 20 minutes. So we may be reaching a point here where we're gonna wrap it up unless there's some final questions or thoughts. We still have 40 or so people on board. Been a good discussion.
Hey, Bo, it's Kevin. I'm having a hard time putting my hand up for some reason.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. One, with respect to the broodstock question. Early in the bloater program, when Ontario and New York and US Fish saw how difficult it was to complete the wild collections, Ontario decided that we would try and put some of our bloater aside and develop them into broodstock. And in the first year, we had so few survivors that we kept everything as brood. In subsequent years, as the wild collection got better, we had a lot more animals to work with. Since then, we've now got 6 or 7 different year classes of bloater. We're doing some diet work to try and get better performance out of them, but we're collecting close to 10 million eggs a year. So that can be done. I think the genetics is pretty good. You know, I think the preference is to go to the other quick comment I want to make, and I think it relates to Rusty's presentation. By the way, I've found the whole thing fascinating. I think Rusty mentioned that they were trying to incubate lake whitefish eggs on well water. Again, at White Lake, where we've been growing lake whitefish for a fair number of years, we have the luxury of having pretty natural winter temperatures of 3.5 or 4 degrees. We get really good eye-up rates and really good hatch. Last year, thinking that we might have a new target, maybe capacity limited at White Lake, we actually tried incubating some lake whitefish eggs at one of the stations that has groundwater, 8.5 degrees Celsius year round or 47 degrees year round. Eye-up rates and hatch rates were way down. So that's just 1 year of data, but temperature may be a problem.
I'd have to agree with that, Kevin, is that a lot of the reading too that I've been doing lately, they certainly can maybe survive 7 or 8, but their optimal is way down by 4, 3, 4. You know, for us here at our facility for a long time, and to some extent even today, our production fish are limited just by flow. That we're still doing groundwater at 7, 8 centigrade. You know, we just have to collect more eggs for us at least, but we are trying to move all of our stuff to be able to manipulate our temperatures to get in that sweet spot. There's a cool paper, and Russ and I were talking about it. We've even seen when you have elevated incubation temperatures for whitefish, it actually spreads out their hatch over a longer period of time. And I want to say, Rusty can correct me, like I want to say one of his egg takes, like they hatched over like a 4 or 5 week period. And I know I've had hatches last at least 3 weeks where from first emergence, and they're still just trickling out of the jar. But from what I've read too, once you get in that sweet spot, it tightens up to a 24-hour period.
Yeah, and I don't, you know, again, if someone wanted to connect with Tim Drew, he knows far more about this than I just know enough to be dangerous. So my apologies.
Yeah, thanks for the input there, Kevin, because that kind of reaffirms some of the theories, you know, I'm working with now, and that we need to change our temperature regime on these eggs. And so hopefully, like I said, we did a total remodel of our hatchery this fall, and we're still working out the kinks, and hopefully maybe by the end of this year, hopefully definitely by next year, we can have a more consistent and cooler incubation period, and we can really start figuring this stuff out. But yeah, thanks for the input. That's good to know that we're headed the right direction.
I think you are.
Oh, can you get Rusty, Kris, and Kevin, or whoever Kevin thinks actually knows, which I don't believe for even a second, but can you get those 3 hooked up? Can you get an email sent to get all of us hooked up so that we can actually talk about this somewhere?
Absolutely.
I think this is a partner that we haven't yet spoken with, and we got to be better at that.
Yes, absolutely. I can forward you Kevin's email for sure.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. I think that's it. We'll call it here. Wishing everybody a very happy holiday. Thanks again for the great attendance. Thanks to Jason and Rusty and Kris for great talks. And please join us again for our monthly Coregonid science webinar. Sean Rooney teaching us about the Irish Coregonids over there. I mean, in addition to the accent, he's going to give a great talk. So many reasons to come. So thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.